You know, there's an affirmation that we say at Unity: I'm alive, alert, awake, joyous, and enthusiastic about this day. I fairly sizzle with zeal and enthusiasm and spring forth with a mighty faith to do the things that ought to be done by me right now. You know that one? That's a great one. My mother at age 91 still says that every day. And, you know, there's something wonderful about that affirmation. It just gets all the juices flowing very beautifully. And it kind of characterizes people in the New Thought, ancient wisdom tradition. They think, oh, it's your positive thinking. And I was teaching a workshop, in fact, about the use of the human mind and talking about positive thinking as having the root P-O-S-I, which means to position. Negate means negative thinking, means to eliminate, right? To negate. Positive thinking positions your thinking with an end result in mind. Negative thinking negates your access to the rich resources that are within. So I was teaching this at a workshop, and a fellow said, I had an experience of using that for healing. He said, 9 months ago, this hand was going to be amputated. And we all looked, and the hand was perfect. I said, well, what's the story? He said, I was putting in a new fuse box, an electrical system, in my home. And there was a cartridge fuse. I was plugging it into the new box, and it exploded and tore my hand to shreds. There was nothing left of it, just sinews hanging out. And he said to himself, my hand's going to be fine. He looked for some liquid to put his hand into, and he found a bucket. He put his hand into it. It was used motor oil from his lawnmower engine. And he started toward the stairs, and his friend who had been working on the project with him came down the stairs and said, what happened? I heard an explosion. He said, you got to get me to the emergency ward. Well, why? Well, what happened? He said, my hand's really hurt. You got to help me out. He said, well, show me. And he pulled his hand out of the oil, and his friend fainted. So he drove himself to the emergency ward. And after looking at the wound, they said, there's nothing left of your hand. You'll never have any sensation in it. And with the mess of it, we're recommending that we amputate the hand. He said, my hand's going to be fine. Just clean it up, patch it up, my hand is going to be fine. And it was against all their better judgment, but they said, we'll keep an eye on it. They cleaned up the wound, and he would come in weekly. And within 3 months, his hand was completely healed. Except it was as numb as wood. There was no sensation in it whatsoever. 6 months to the day of the accident, practically, he and his wife were going to a store, and his hand suddenly felt like it was on fire. And he decided that he'd sit down while his wife finished the shopping. When she came out, he had perfect sensation in his hand. Here it was, 9 months after the accident, and he showed us the hands. And the only difference was this looked newer. It looked fresher, it looked younger somehow. There wasn't a scar on it. And I said, could I get the medical record just so I could see it? As a scholar and as a researcher, those are the sorts of things I like to track down. Sure enough, got a hold of the medical record, saw it, absolute testimony, recommend, amputate the hand. Now, what is that? Is that positive thinking? Or is it way more than that, which all of us have access to? You see, we could say it's a miracle, but how much more of a miracle is it than the beating of your heart or the fact that you can breathe, right? I have an important idea behind all of this, is that all that our senses can testify to is outer appearances. They can't testify to causation. So while we can look at it and say, yes, this is remarkable, all we can really say is it's a miracle because we don't have any idea how it's caused. Phineas Parkhurst Quimby in the mid-1800s was a watchmaker, a watch repairman in the area of Boston. And he was fascinated at the time with a new technology that had just come about. It was called mesmerism. It was the precursor to what we know of as hypnosis. And they would take these magnetic wands and pass them over people's bodies, and they'd go into these mesmeric states. We know them as trance states. And he was doing demonstrations of this up and down the East Coast. He had a young man named Lucius that he would place in these mesmeric states, and he would do what we now call technical remote viewing. People from the audience would give him the name, age, and whereabouts of a person or a place or a thing, and he would go check it out and then report. And the press of the day were raving about this, that it was an amazing demonstration and quite appropriate for anybody who wanted to really know more about the power of the human mind. So Phineas Parkhurst Quimby had an additional issue going on. He had a terrible back problem. He had a degenerative kidney disease, and the doctors of the day said that one of his kidneys was so badly diseased that a little part of it, about 3 inches long, was just hanging on by a couple of threads, but it was going to kill him within 10 years. And he lived with constant pain. So he said, after one of his performances, he thought, well, you know, I've never asked Lucius to check out my back, so I'm going to have him do that. So, Lucius, would you check out my back? Sure. Put his hands on Quimby's back and said, whoa, your kidneys are a mess. In fact, the one on the right is so badly diseased, there's a little strip of about 3 inches just hanging on by a couple of threads. In other words, exactly what the medical profession had been saying. And fearing the worst but asking anyway, Quimby said, well, can anything be done? He said, sure, I'll take care of it right now. And Quimby felt immense heat coming out of Lucius's hands. The next morning he woke up, no back pain. It was gone. Whatever it was completely gone. And Quimby said, okay, what just happened? So he tried to track down how this healing could be possible. So he went to Scripture. And in the Bible, he saw that Christ had really figured it out. Jesus, the Christ, had figured out the science of healing. Not at the level of symptom, at the level of causation. You see? And what medical profession can't testify to is causation. So he began in earnest a study of the science of healing as Christ performed healing. And one of the people that Quimby healed was a woman in the Boston area named Mary Baker Eddy, who started the Church of Christ Science. Right? And years later, the descendants of Quimby were able to get a hold of the original manuscripts and publish them, and that's available as the Quimby manuscripts. Great metaphysics. If anybody is interested, it was actually recommended to me by someone back in the early 1970s. And it's been an important part of the way I've thought about healing ever since. Now, in my work as a clinical hypnotist and also as a neurolinguistic programmer, I had a number of clients that came to me over the years and said, I've got this problem and no medical treatment is able to make a difference with it. Do you think you can do something that might help? And I would say, I don't know. But as long as the medical doctors say that they don't have any idea, I say, woohoo! Because now it's open territory. And as long as I can get consent from the medical doctor that says there's no contraindication of the use of the power of the human mind in this case, then we're good. One of the persons I worked with had a degenerative arthritic condition in her spine. She was told that she was going to end up in a wheelchair. Now, she was a dancer, she was a golfer, she was a tennis player, she was a realtor, she was a mom of 3 kids, 2 teenage daughters. She was very active in real estate. She said, this is the worst diagnosis I could ever imagine. They can't do anything for me. What can we do? So I said, well, Have a seat. Let's talk to the part of you that generates degenerative arthritis in your spine. And so we got in contact with that part of our own non-conscious mind and said, so what's the positive intention? What are you trying to do for her? And her inner mind said, get her to slow down. Well, that's a pretty good way to do it, isn't it? Confine her to a wheelchair for the rest of her life. But what are some other ways, new and creative ways that could get her to slow down besides that? I could ask my daughters to give me some more help around the house. I could get some help at the office, get an assistant, get back out of some of my community commitments and stay focused on some of those things. Great. So why don't you go ahead and do that? Any objections? No objections? Okay, let's go for it. Guess what? She went back to the neurologist, got studied, and her neurologist said, what are you doing? It's not gotten any worse. And in fact, you've improved. What are you doing? She was a little embarrassed. She said, well, it's kind of a meditation thing. And he said, keep doing it. When I was invited to speak at Unity Minneapolis in Golden Valley years ago, Andrea Fisher was on the platform with Jim Fisher. Andrea had been in a head-on collision with an 18-wheeler truck. She was in a Honda Civic. When she woke up 3 months after the accident, her spinal column had been crushed, and she was on a respirator. When she opened her eyes, they explained to her what was going on, that it wasn't going to get any better than death. And her husband said, I can't take it any longer. I need a divorce. So she knew at the young age of, late 20s that her life was pretty much over. But she said, I'm going to walk out of here. I don't know how, but I'm going to walk out of here. She brought in her Swami and got meditation and focused every day. She spent 8 to 10 hours a day in meditation, focusing on walking again. She had whole foods diet brought into the hospital, which was difficult, can you imagine, back then. And she had chiropractic care that came in. She had massage therapy done weekly, even though she could feel nothing from the neck down. Within a year, she was off the respirators, which was a miracle. 3 years after the accident, she stood up next to her bed. She described it to me this way. She said, I finally recognized that any last vestige of doubt had been removed. It was the middle of the night, and I checked my body. I had no doubt in my body that I'd walk again. And I stood up next to my bed. Now, her body couldn't hold herself because her muscles had atrophied for so long, but she then began physical therapy in earnest, and she then walked out of the hospital 4 years after that. And I would bring her to conferences to tell her story. She'd reach down and touch her toes. She was more flexible than I was. She'd walk, you couldn't even tell. They had to install a couple of metal rods in her back just because she had no actual bone in her back. It had been pulverized. So it was an astounding story. In fact, the power of her mind started to actually dissolve the metal rods in her back. It was so strong. Fascinating story. Another woman that I worked with had been in a severe automobile accident. She had 7 spinal fusion operations. She wore a neck brace. This is how she walked. Neck and back brace. 17 years, chronically pain handicapped. She spent all of her family's resources trying to get relief. She went to a conference by Moshe Feldenkrais. I don't know if you're familiar with this Israeli engineer, but he does some amazing work. She spent the last $35 in her pocket to get a private session with him at the conference. And she walked in his suite, and he said, get rid of that thing. She took off her back brace. Said, walk across the floor, back and forth. Lay down on the table, pushed her back a few times. Walk again, lay down. Okay, sit up, turn your head. She said, turn my head? I can't. Turn your head, she went. No pain, all gone. She went back to her neurologist and said, look what I can do. And he said, you can't do that. I did the surgery on your back. That's impossible. And he slammed the door as he left the room. Now, in Andrea's case, the medical doctor was so blown away that he left traditional medicine to study complementary and alternative medicine. Okay? So if you look at it, this is a confrontation to a mental model that says this is how the world is. When you're open to spirit, when you're open to possibility, what is possible? All things are possible, right? And it's already done in the mind of God. And it's no more of a miracle than the fact that you're sitting here upright, breathing. It's all a miracle. So how do we tap into it? We tap into it through concentration, what we focus our awareness on. Because where our attention goes, our energy flows. Imagination, what are you out-picturing on an ongoing basis? And suggestion, what are you affirming? What are you saying in your dialogues with others? What are you saying in your conversation within? What is your prayer without ceasing? Dear God, make this horrible pain go away. What are you focusing on? What's in your imagination? What are you concentrating on? Or do we use affirmative prayer as we're taught to outpicture the ideal end result? And so, if you join me in this affirmation, I'm alive, alert, awake, joyous, and enthusiastic about this day. Try it. I am alive, alert, awake, joyous, and enthusiastic about this day. Now try this one. I fairly sizzle with zeal and enthusiasm. Try that. I fairly sizzle with zeal and enthusiasm. Now this. And spring forth with a mighty faith. Spring forth with a mighty faith to do the things that ought to be done by me. To do the things that ought to be done by me. Right now. Try it. Right. When? Right now. Have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for inviting me. The workshop that we're going to be doing after the service this afternoon is going to focus on concentration, imagination, suggestion, and expand how a set of tools in each of these areas can be used to bring the power of healing alive in you. Thank you for the invitation.